The knife was 3 inches from his throat, and Daniel knew this might be the end. The metal caught the fractured light from the street lamp above, and in that frozen moment, he wondered if this was really how his story would finish. Not with warmth or comfort, not with someone remembering his name, but here on cold pavement with the smell of rotting garbage mixing with rain. He was 11 years old, and he had already learned that life didn't care about fairness. The man holding the blade was twice his size, with wild eyes that showed something Daniel recognized all too well: desperation. The dangerous kind that makes people do things they might regret later, or maybe never regret at all. "Give me the bag," the man hissed, his voice rough and breaking. Daniel's fingers tightened around the plastic grocery bag he'd been carrying. Inside was everything he'd managed to find that day: half a sandwich pulled from a dumpster, behind Antonio's deli, a dented can of soup with no label, and a wool scarf someone had dropped on the sidewalk. The scarf wasn't even for him. It was for Mrs. Chen, the old woman who slept near the library entrance and had been coughing for 3 days straight. I said, "Give me the bag." Then everything changed in an instant. A car horn blared through the night air. Tires screamed against wet pavement. Glass shattered like 1,000 frozen tears exploding in the darkness. And Daniel ran, but not away from the man with the knife. He ran toward the sound, toward the crash, toward danger when every instinct should have told him to flee. He couldn't explain why he ran toward danger instead of away from it. But what Daniel didn't know was that this single choice would change to lives forever, in ways neither of them could possibly imagine. 3 months before that night, Daniel had been invisible for so long that sometimes he wondered if he'd forgotten how to be seen at all. The city moved around him like water flowing around a stone, constant, uncaring, occasionally violent but mostly just indifferent. He had learned the rhythms of survival in this concrete jungle. The best dumpsters were behind the fancy restaurants on 5th Avenue, but timing was everything. The public library opened its doors at 9 in the morning, and if you were clean enough, quiet enough, and small enough, you could slip into the children's section and pretend to read until your frozen fingers finally thawed. There were others like him. Marcus, 13 years old with scars on his arms that he never talked about. Little Maya couldn't have been more than 8. And some nights she still cried for her mother in her sleep. They weren't a family, not in the traditional sense, but they weren't completely alone either. Daniel had learned very early that survival meant making yourself useful to others. He was small, fast, and forgettable, which were actually advantages on the streets. He shared food when he could spare it. He protected Maya when Marcus wasn't around. He had learned that kindness was the only currency that actually multiplied instead of disappearing. His mother used to say that, back when she was still alive. She used to say that kindness always comes back to you, even when you can't see how. But on the streets, kindness could get you killed. And Daniel was about to test that theory in the most dangerous way possible. Before, that's how Daniel thought of his old life. Just before. His mother's death from cancer. 3 foster homes in quick succession, each one worse than the last. The 3rd home, with Mr. Peterson, who smiled too much and locked bedroom doors at night. For reasons Daniel tried not to think about, that was the one he finally ran from. 14 months ago now. He had been 10 years old. Better the brutal honesty of the streets than that kind of prison. He had learned to stop counting days after that. Time was different when you were homeless. But even in the darkness, Daniel remembered moments of kindness. The woman at the bakery who sometimes left a bag of day-old bread in the alley. The security guard at the library who pretended not to see him sneaking in. Antonio, the deli owner, who once gave him a whole sandwich and said, "You look like my grandson. Eat, boy, eat." These moments didn't erase the cruelty. They didn't make him forget the teenagers who had thrown bottles at him for fun. They didn't erase the businessman in an expensive suit who had literally stepped over Marcus when he collapsed from hunger, phone pressed to his ear, complaining about traffic as a child lay dying at his feet. Daniel had learned that the world contained both angels and demons walking the same streets. But he had also learned that most people were neither. Most people simply didn't see. They looked right through homeless children as if they didn't exist at all. And maybe that was worse than active cruelty. At least cruelty acknowledged you were human enough to hurt. The morning of the crash started the way most mornings started for Daniel. Cold. So cold it hurt to breathe. Marcus stumbled into their shelter behind the old theater with a split lip still bleeding and his right eye already swelling shut. "What happened?" Daniel demanded. "Nothing," Marcus said in that flat, dead voice. They shared what little food they had. Daniel had an apple he'd managed to pocket from a fruit stand, which made him feel guilty, but not guilty enough to starve. "I heard they're giving away coats at the church on 7th Street, Maya said quietly, "today, at noon." Daniel looked at Marcus's thin jacket, at Maya's bare hands red and chapped from the cold, at his own threadbare sweater. Winter was coming, and none of them would survive it without better protection. "We'll go," he decided. "All of us together." But they never made it to the church that day. On the way there, Daniel saw Mrs. Chen sitting against the library wall, shaking violently, her cough so much worse. He spent 3 hours trying to help her, trading his only apple for cough syrup, finding her a blanket, getting advice from a pharmacist. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was something. By the time he left Mrs. Chen, the church had closed. The coats were gone. That's when he decided to check the dumpsters early. That's when he found the scarf. That's when the man with the knife appeared. And that's when Daniel heard the sound that would change everything. The sound of the crash was wrong in a way that Daniel's soul recognized immediately. It wasn't just loud. It was the wrong kind of loud. Metal folding and twisting in ways that metal was never meant to fold. Glass transforming into powder. The wet, horrible crunch of something human meeting something steel. Daniel rounded the corner at a full run. A black Mercedes was crumpled against the concrete barrier like a crushed tin can. The front end was completely demolished. Steam rose from the hood. One headlight blinked, stuttering, confused and dying. No one else was around. No witnesses. No help. Just Daniel and the wreckage and the ominous sound of something hissing. Every survival instinct screamed at him to keep walking. This wasn't his problem. Getting involved meant police, meant attention, meant possibly being sent back into the system. He actually took a step backward. Then he heard it, a moan, soft and barely human, the sound of someone dying. Daniel's feet moved before his brain could stop them. The driver's side door was jammed. He pulled with all his strength, shoulders screaming, hands slipping on blood-slicked metal. The door groaned and finally gave way. Inside, a man in his late 50s, expensive suit torn and soaked with blood, a deep gash on his forehead bleeding heavily. His eyes half open but unfocused. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's lips moved but no sound came out. That's when Daniel smelled it. Gasoline. Heavy and unmistakable. "I need you to wake up, sir. Please." Daniel's voice was urgent now. "I can't carry you by myself. You need to help me." The man's eyes finally found Daniel's face. Something like recognition flickered there. "Can you move your legs?" The man tried, but his leg was pinned beneath twisted metal. Then Daniel saw it, a spark, somewhere deep in the wreckage, small and orange and growing. Fire. Later, Daniel would never remember making the decision. His body just moved. He squeezed into the wrecked car, wedging his small body between the seat and the crumpled door frame. Sharp metal cut into his ribs. The man was so heavy, barely able to help. "Sir, I need you to push, on 3. 1, leave me," the man whispered. "Kid, just leave me. Save yourself." "No," Daniel said firmly. "I'm not leaving you, on 3. 2, the man pushed. Daniel pulled. Something gave way with a sickening crunch. They tumbled backward onto the wet pavement. Daniel gasped, rolled, grabbed the man's arm, and dragged him. His vision blurred, but he kept dragging. The explosion was massive. It lifted Daniel off his feet and threw him into the concrete barrier. Pain bloomed across his entire back. His ears rang so loudly he couldn't hear anything else. When he could finally see again, the car was a complete inferno. The man lay beside him, bleeding but breathing, still alive. Daniel had actually done it. Against all odds, he had saved this man's life. But what Daniel didn't know was that saving this man would be the easy part. What came next would be far more dangerous and far more complicated. Sirens approached. Paramedics rushed over. "Son, are you hurt? Let me check you out." Daniel shook his head. I'm okay. What's your name, son? He looked one more time at the man on the ground, now being loaded onto a stretcher. Daniel, he whispered. My name is Daniel. You're a hero, Daniel. You saved this man's life. But Daniel didn't feel like a hero. He felt cold and tired and scared. We need to check you out properly. But Daniel was already walking away, disappearing into the shadows the way he always did. Before they could take his picture or call child services or trap him in the system again. Invisible again. Safe in his invisibility. Meanwhile, in a penthouse apartment high above the streets where Daniel struggled to survive, Richard Morrison woke up at exactly 5:47 a.m., the way he did every single morning. His wife's side of the bed hadn't been slept in for 6 months. Not since she moved to the guest room. Not since their last big argument. The divorce papers were probably coming soon. And the truth was, he couldn't find it in himself to care very much. Richard went through his morning routine with mechanical precision. Shower, exactly 7 minutes. Coffee, black. News, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg, in that order. Efficiency. Control. Success. These were the pillars of Richard Morrison's life. He had built Morrison Industries from nothing. 30 years of 18-hour workdays. Now the company was worth $3 billion. Now he had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Now his daughter barely spoke to him. Now his wife slept in another room. Now he woke up in an enormous apartment that felt empty despite being full of expensive furniture. But the quarterly earnings were excellent. And that's what mattered, right? The day of the accident had been exhaustingly long. Board meeting that ran over. Conference call that went terribly. Dinner with potential investors. All fake smiles and calculated charm. By 10 p.m., Richard was driving himself home because his regular driver had called in sick. The tunnel route was faster at night. He was thinking about the Tokyo expansion when the other car ran the red light. Richard had exactly half a second to register what was happening. Not enough time to brake. Not enough time to swerve. Just barely enough time to think, this is it. This is how I die. Then impact. Metal and glass and physics. Then darkness. Then pain. Then a voice. A child's voice, young and scared but determined. Sir, can you hear me? Please wake up. Richard Morrison woke up in a hospital room. His head throbbed. His left leg was in a cast. Someone had stitched up the gash on his forehead. A nurse rushed over. Morrison. Thank God you're awake. What happened? You were in a serious car accident. You're very lucky to be alive. If that boy hadn't pulled you out before the car exploded, you would have died. What boy? The one who saved your life. The paramedics said a child pulled you from the wreckage. Maybe 11 or 12. Do you remember? Richard closed his eyes. Fragments of memory floated up. The smell of gasoline. Small hands, impossibly strong, under his arms. A young voice saying, on 3, 2, then darkness. Where is he now? We don't know, sir. He left before anyone could get his information. Find him, Richard said. I need you to find him. But what Richard would discover about that boy would force him to confront everything he thought he knew about himself. And it would cost him far more than he ever imagined. Richard spent a week in the hospital, his mind running in endless circles. Who was this boy? Why had he helped? Where had he gone? The police had nothing. No witnesses except the paramedics who arrived after the rescue. Just a thin kid with dark hair who disappeared into the night. Richard's assistant Jennifer visited on day 3. The board is concerned about your recovery timeline, sir. The shareholders' meeting. Cancel all my meetings, Richard interrupted. Jennifer blinked. For how long, sir? Until I find him. Find who? The boy who saved my life. He hired Catherine Wells, the best private investigator money could buy. She started with the obvious places, hospitals, homeless shelters, public schools, nothing. Then soup kitchens, church outreach programs, foster care databases. Still nothing. The boy was a ghost. This kid is very good at staying hidden, Mr. Morrison, Catherine told him. Either he's extraordinarily skilled at disappearing, or he's been living on the streets long enough to know exactly how to become invisible. Months. More likely years. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. A child. Living on the streets. 4 years. while Richard had been in his climate-controlled penthouse, drinking $1,000 wine and complaining about stock prices. And still, despite having nothing, that child had run toward a burning car instead of away from it, had risked everything to save a complete stranger. "Keep looking," Richard said quietly. "Money is no object." But finding Daniel was only the beginning. The real challenge would be earning his trust, and that would prove far more difficult than any business deal Richard had ever negotiated. Meanwhile, Daniel was trying to go back to normal, but the crash had changed something inside him. His ribs hurt for weeks. The bruises on his back bloomed through stages of color. Marcus asked what happened. Daniel said he fell. The light tasted like ash. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The man's face, pale and bleeding. The fire. The impossible choice. For those few seconds, pulling that man from the wreck, he had felt something he hadn't felt in so long. Important, valuable, real. Then he had walked away and become invisible again. 3 weeks after the crash, Daniel saw his own face on a flyer, and his blood turned to ice. He was passing a coffee shop when he saw it taped to the window. A police sketch. Not perfect, but close enough. "Do you know this boy?" Substantial reward for information. Reward. That single word changed everything. Money meant people would look. Money meant even people who had helped him might turn him in. Money made people do things they wouldn't normally do. He grabbed the flyer down, crumpled it, shoved it in his pocket. But then he saw more of them. On lampposts, at bus stops, in store windows. His face everywhere. Someone was looking for him. The man from the crash. It had to be. Daniel should have felt relief. The man was alive. He wanted to thank Daniel. Instead, Daniel felt pure, cold fear. Because he knew how this worked. Rich people didn't give out rewards just from kindness. They wanted something in return. Control. Ownership. A heartwarming story they could tell at dinner parties about the poor orphan they saved. Daniel had been a prop in enough foster family photos to understand. So he did what had kept him alive this long. He disappeared completely. He left the alcove behind the theater, avoided the library, stopped going near Antonio's deli. He, Marcus, and Maya moved to the industrial district on the far side of the city, where the flyers wouldn't be posted. It was worse there. Colder, hungrier, lonelier. But it felt safer from the man and his money and his searching. At least, that's what Daniel told himself. Until Maya got sick. 6 weeks after the crash, Daniel broke his own rule. And he did it for the best possible reason. Maya was sick. Really sick. Her fever was dangerously high. She was delirious, shaking violently. Marcus was gone, searching for medicine. Daniel was alone with her in an abandoned warehouse, watching her shake and knowing she might die. He needed medicine. He needed money. He needed help. So he went back to the old neighborhood, back to the familiar streets where his face was on every surface. It was a terrible mistake. A black SUV pulled up beside him. Daniel ran. He had gotten very good at running. But the SUV kept pace, and a voice called out, "Please, wait. We just want to talk to you." Daniel dodged into a narrow alley. The SUV couldn't follow. Then he turned a corner and saw her standing there, blocking his path. A woman in her mid-40s, professionally dressed. "Daniel," she said calmly. He froze. "How do you know my name?" "My name is Catherine Wells. I'm a private investigator, and I work for Richard Morrison, the man whose life you saved. I don't want anything from him. Just leave me alone. He wants to thank you. That's all. I don't need thanks." "Then what do you need, Daniel?" The question caught him completely off guard. For a moment, the truth almost came spilling out. Medicine for Maya. A warm place to sleep. Food. A future. Hope. Safety. A chance. But he couldn't say it. Couldn't admit weakness. "Nothing," he said firmly. "I need nothing from anyone." Catherine studied him. "You're scared. And you have every right to be. You think this is some rich person's guilt project. You've been burned before." Daniel said nothing. "What if you're wrong about him? What if walking away from this is the biggest mistake you'll ever make? Or what if trusting him is the biggest mistake?" Catherine smiled sadly. "That's the real question, isn't it? Trust." She held out a business card. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready, No pressure, no demands. The choice is yours. She set it on a crate and walked away. Daniel stared at that card for a long time. Then he pocketed it and ran back to Maya. But Maya got worse, much worse. By morning, she was barely responsive. Her skin had taken on a terrible gray color. Her breathing was shallow. Marcus came back empty-handed, close to tears. "We need to take her to a hospital," he said, his voice breaking. "Daniel, she's dying. They'll split us up. Child services will separate us. She'll die if we don't do something. Is that better?" The truth hung between them, heavy and horrible. Daniel looked at Maya's small body, then at the card in his pocket, then at Marcus's desperate face. "Stay with her," Daniel said. "Keep her warm. I'll be back. I promise." He found a payphone 3 blocks away. His hands shook so badly he could barely dial. He had to try 3 times. 3 rings. 4. He almost hung up. Then hello. A man's voice. Deep. Older. Richard Morrison himself. Daniel's throat closed. He couldn't speak. "Hello? Is someone there?" "It's me," Daniel finally whispered. "The boy." From the crash, silence. Complete silence for 3 heartbeats. Then, "Thank God. Thank God you called. Are you all right?" "I need help," Daniel said, and admitting it felt like jumping off a cliff. "My friend. She's sick. Really sick. She needs a hospital, but I don't have money. Where are you?" Richard's voice was urgent but calm. "Tell me where you are, and I'll be there." Daniel gave him the address, even though every instinct screamed at him to hang up. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't move." The line went dead. Daniel leaned against the phone booth and tried to breathe. He had just done the one thing he swore he would never do. He had asked for help. But what Daniel didn't know was that making this call would set in motion events that would transform not just his life, but the life of everyone around him. And there would be no going back. Richard Morrison arrived in exactly 12 minutes. He stepped out of the SUV alone. No driver, no assistant. Just him. They stared at each other. Richard looked different than Daniel remembered, older, more tired. The stitches were gone from his forehead, but a scar remained. "You're real," Richard said finally. "You're actually real. Did you think I wasn't? I'd started to wonder if I imagined you." He stopped. "Why did you call?" "My friend is sick. She needs a hospital. But I don't have. Where is she? Take me to her." Daniel hesitated. This was it. The point of no return. Once he showed Richard where they lived, there would be no going back. "Please," Richard said quietly. "Let me help. That's all I want." Daniel made his choice and led him to the warehouse. Richard Morrison had seen poverty before. On television, in newspaper reports, in the abstract. But walking into that freezing warehouse, seeing the cardboard beds, smelling the cold and damp and desperation, it wasn't abstract anymore. It was brutally real. And this was where the child who saved his life had been sleeping. Maya was barely conscious, lying on blankets. Marcus stood protectively between her and Richard, his body language screaming hostility. Richard knelt beside Maya. Even he could see her fever was dangerous. "We need to get her to a hospital immediately." "No," Marcus said flatly. "Hospitals mean questions. Questions mean child services. Child services means they separate us." Richard looked at Daniel, who nodded. Richard made a decision that would change all their lives. "I have a private physician. Dr. Sarah Chen. She makes house calls and doesn't ask unnecessary questions. We get Maya stabilized first. Then we figure out everything else. Together." "Why should we trust you?" Marcus demanded. Richard met his hostile gaze. "Because I owe Daniel my life. Because I have resources you desperately need. Because that little girl is dying, and I can help save her." He pulled out his phone and made the call. Dr. Chen arrived 40 minutes later with a medical bag and no questions. She examined Maya quickly, started N4, administered antibiotics. "She has severe pneumonia, doctor," Chen said quietly to Richard. "She needs constant monitoring for at least 48 hours. Somewhere warm and clean. She will be," Richard said with certainty. "I'll make sure of it." He looked at Daniel, at Marcus, at Maya. "All of you, come with me here tonight. Just a warm bed and proper medical care until Maya is stable. After that, We talk about what comes next. But first, we save her life. And if we say no, Daniel asked, then I leave. And I hope Maya survives the night on her own. But I think we both know she won't. It wasn't really a choice at all. Daniel looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Maya, so small and still. Okay, Daniel whispered. We'll come with you. Richard's penthouse felt like landing on an alien planet. Warmth. Light. Space that seemed to go on forever. Daniel, Marcus, and Maya sat in the enormous living room. 3 small, dirty figures surrounded by luxury they couldn't comprehend. Drive. Chen had set up Maya in a guest room with proper equipment. Richard had ordered food. Pizza, pasta, fresh fruit, warm bread. More food than Daniel had seen in months. Marcus ate mechanically, eyes constantly darting around, waiting for the trap. Daniel couldn't eat at all. His stomach was too tight. Richard sat across from them, just watching. You must have questions, Richard said gently. Why are you doing this? Daniel asked. Really? Why? You saved my life. That doesn't mean you owe us all this. It means exactly that, Richard interrupted, his voice cracking. You're a child. You were homeless, hungry, probably terrified every day, and you still ran toward a burning car when anyone else would have run away. You risked everything for a complete stranger. People don't do that. Not in my world. Silence. Then Marcus spoke, his voice hard. What do you really want from us? Richard looked at him, truly seeing him. Nothing, Richard said quietly. Honestly, nothing. Everyone wants something. You're right. I do want something. Richard leaned forward. I want to help in a way that actually matters. I want to do something with my money that means something real. I want to be the kind of person this boy apparently believed was worth saving. We're not your redemption project, Marcus said flatly. No. You're 3 children who deserve a real chance at life. And I'm someone who has resources I don't deserve and time I've wasted. Maybe we can help each other. Daniel studied Richard's face, looking for the lie. All he saw was exhaustion and desperate hope. What happens tomorrow? Daniel asked. Tomorrow, Maya gets better. Tomorrow, you rest. Tomorrow, we figure out what comes next. Together. I'm not making decisions for you. And if we wanted to leave, then you leave, Richard said simply. I won't stop you. I won't call the police. But I hope you'll stay. At least until Maya is well. It wasn't a promise that fixed everything. It wasn't a guarantee. It was just an offer. An honest offer. The first real one Daniel had gotten in years. Okay, Daniel said. We'll stay, for now. That night, Daniel slept in a real bed for the first time in 14 months. He lay in the darkness, surrounded by clean sheets, warmth seeping into bones that had forgotten what warmth felt like. And he cried. For everything he had lost. For everything he had survived. For the terrifying possibility that maybe things could actually be different. That maybe kindness wasn't always a trap. That maybe trust wasn't always betrayed. Maybe, just maybe, the weeks that followed were like learning to live in a different world. Maya recovered slowly but steadily. The fever broke. Color returned to her cheeks. She started smiling again. She started being a child again instead of just a survival machine. Marcus remained deeply suspicious. He watched Richard constantly, waiting for the mask to slip. But Richard didn't push, didn't demand gratitude, didn't expect immediate trust. He went to work during the day, but started coming home earlier. He had dinner with them every evening. He asked about their day and actually listened. He watched movies with them. He taught Daniel chess. It was strange and domestic and almost normal. Daniel found himself caught between 2 worlds. The streets were still real, still calling to him in his dreams. He would wake up at night in a panic, certain he was back in the warehouse. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. 2 weeks after they moved in, Richard sat Daniel down. We need to talk about the future, Richard said. Daniel's stomach dropped. You want us to leave? What? No. The opposite. Richard looked genuinely surprised. I want you to stay. All 3 of you. Permanently. But to do that legally, we need to navigate the system. Child services, foster care proceedings, lawyers, no. Daniel stood abruptly. We're not going into the system. We're not getting separated. Daniel, listen. Richard's voice was firm but kind. I'm not sending you anywhere. I'm trying to keep you here safely. But to do that legally, to protect you and me, we need to do this right. I have excellent lawyers. We can figure this out together. How? You're not our parent. You're not family. Then I'll become your family, Richard said quietly, legally. The room went silent. What? I'll file for legal guardianship. For all three of you. It will take time. There will be investigations, but I can make this work. If you want me to. Daniel stared at him. Why would you do that? Richard was quiet for a long time. I have a daughter, he said finally, Emma. She's 16. She hasn't spoken to me in 8 months except to tell me how much she hates what I've become. My wife is divorcing me. I spent 30 years building a company, accumulating wealth, chasing success. I thought that's what mattered. He turned back to Daniel. But when I was pinned in that car, when I thought I was going to die, you know what I regretted? Daniel shook his head. Everything. Every birthday I missed. Every conversation I didn't have because I was too busy. Every moment I traded for money sitting in a bank account. I can't fix that. I can't go back and be the father Emma needed. But maybe I can do this. Maybe I can be for you what I failed to be for her. We're not your do-over, Daniel said quietly. No, Richard agreed. But maybe we can help each other become better. Maybe we can build something new together. The process wasn't simple. Child Protective Services got involved. Interviews, home inspections, background checks. A social worker named Patricia Williams visited every week, asking questions, taking notes. Marcus's past came up. Abuse allegations, behavioral issues, a record of running away. Maya's parents were investigated. Mother, overdose. Father, unknown. Daniel's file was thickest. His mother's death. 3 failed foster placements. Allegations against Mr. Peterson that had never been filed because Daniel ran before anyone could help. This is very complicated, Mr. Morrison, Patricia told Richard. You're a single man with no prior parenting experience beyond your estranged daughter. You want custody of 3 deeply traumatized children. The courts will scrutinize this heavily. I understand. Do you? These children need stability, therapy, structure, consistency. Your work history suggests you're not that person. I'm changing, Richard said firmly. I've already changed. People don't change that quickly. Then watch me. Watch what I do, not what I say. And Richard did change. He cut his work hours dramatically. Started arriving at 9 instead of 6. Left at 5 instead of 9. Stopped taking calls during dinner. Stopped working weekends. His board was concerned. His investors were nervous. His assistant Jennifer was bewildered. Sir, the Tokyo deal needs your attention. Handle it yourself, Jennifer. I don't have the authority. Then I'm giving you that authority. I trust your judgment. In 15 years, he had never said those words. But change was hard. Old habits die hard. One night, 6 weeks after the kids moved in, Richard got an urgent call at 2 a.m. Major crisis in Singapore. Multi-million-dollar deal falling apart. He needed to fly out immediately. He was half-packed when Daniel appeared in his doorway like a ghost. You're leaving, Daniel said flatly. Richard froze. It's just for a few days. Business emergency, right? Of course, business. It's always business, isn't it? Daniel, this is important. So were we. For a while. Until we weren't important enough anymore. The words hit Richard like a punch. In that moment, Richard saw himself through Daniel's eyes. He saw his own father, always leaving. He saw his daughter Emma, waiting by the window for a father who never showed up. He saw the pattern repeating. He unpacked slowly, made a call, sent Jennifer to Singapore instead. The deal fell through. Richard lost $12 million. He didn't care at all. He had breakfast with Daniel the next morning. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. But something fundamental had shifted. Trust, Daniel was learning, wasn't given all at once. It was built over time, in small moments, in tiny choices, in someone staying when leaving would be easier. Marcus didn't trust Richard for a long time. Couldn't trust him. Every adult in Marcus's life had hurt him. Parents who beat him. Foster parents who locked him in closets. Social workers who made promises and sent him back to hell. Richard was just another adult. Another temporary kindness that would curdle into cruelty. So Marcus waited. waited for the mask to slip. He tested every boundary, broke rules deliberately, stayed out past curfew, talked back, pushed hard, waiting for the punishment, the anger, the violence he knew was coming. Richard never raised his voice, never hit him, never raged, just set consequences. Firm, clear, consistent. You broke curfew. That means you lose phone privileges for 3 days. I don't care about the stupid phone. That's fine. The rule still applies. No yelling. No hitting. No rage. It was infuriating. Marcus didn't know how to handle it. 8 weeks in, Marcus finally snapped. He'd had a bad therapy session. The therapist asked about his scars. Marcus deflected. The therapist pushed. Marcus walked out. He came home angry, shaking. He found Richard in the kitchen. I'm not going back to that therapist. Okay, Richard said calmly. We'll find you a different one. I don't want a different one. I don't want any of this. I don't want your charity, your rules, your fake concern. It's not fake, Marcus. Yes, it is. Marcus was shouting now. You're bored with your life. You're guilty about being a bad father. You're trying to fix your failures by playing savior. But we're not your toys. We're not your second chance. And I'm not staying here to watch you get tired of us and throw us away like everyone else does. Silence. Richard set down his coffee. You're right, he said quietly. Marcus blinked, thrown off balance. What? You're right about several things. I am trying to fix my failures. I am guilty about being a terrible father. I did think maybe I could do better with you three. Marcus's hands were shaking. But here's what's also true, Richard continued. I care about you. All three of you. Not because you're a project. Because you're you. Because Daniel saved my life and made me look at my own life and realize I'd been wasting it. Because Maya deserves to be a child. Because you deserve adults who don't hurt you, who keep their promises. Marcus's voice cracked. You'll leave eventually. Everyone always leaves. Then I'll be the first one who doesn't. I'll be the one who stays. You can't promise that. I can promise to try. Every single day. To show up, to stay. To be here. That's all any of us can do. Something cracked inside Marcus. Something that had been holding together fear and anger and pain. He sat down hard on the kitchen floor. Started crying. Couldn't stop. Years of held-back tears. Richard didn't move toward him. Didn't try to touch him. Just sat down nearby. Present. Patient. Waiting. When Marcus could finally breathe again, Richard said quietly, We'll find you a new therapist. And I'll do better about listening. But Marcus, you're not going anywhere unless you choose to leave. This is your home. For as long as you want it. That's a promise I can make. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. But he heard it. The promise. The first promise he had ever believed might be true. Maya was 8 years old, and she had forgotten how to be a child. She had learned to be quiet, small, forgettable. Survival meant not taking up space, not asking for things, not hoping. Richard's penthouse was too big for that strategy. At first, Maya wandered through it like a museum, afraid to touch anything. Then one day she found the piano. It sat in the corner, black and gleaming and beautiful. Maya had never touched a real piano before, but something about it called to her. She pressed one key. The sound filled the room. Richard found her there an hour later, pressing keys one at a time, entranced. Do you want to learn how to really play? He asked gently. Maya nodded, shy and hopeful and afraid to hope. Richard hired a teacher that week. Ms. Rodriguez came twice a week, patient and kind and encouraging. She never got angry when Maya made mistakes. She celebrated every small success. Maya learned scales, then simple songs, then harder pieces. She wasn't particularly talented, but she was happy, genuinely happy in a way she hadn't been in years. Richard would come home and hear her practicing, the notes clumsy but full of effort, and he would feel something shift in his chest. This was what he had missed with Emma. The small moments, the learning, the simple joy of watching someone discover something new. 10 weeks after they moved in, Maya performed her first song all the way through without a mistake. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Simple, perfect. When she finished, she looked up at Richard with eyes full of pride. Was that good? It was beautiful, Richard said, and he meant it. Not because the music was perfect, but because this child, who had been dying on a warehouse floor 3 months ago, was now playing piano in his living room. Because she was safe. Because she was happy. Because somehow, impossibly, they were becoming something like a family. 16 weeks after the crash, the guardianship hearing finally took place. The courtroom was small, sterile, intimidating. Daniel, Marcus, and Maya sat in the front row, dressed in new clothes. They looked like different children from the ones who had lived in that warehouse. But inside, Daniel felt the same. Scared, uncertain, waiting for the system to destroy this fragile good thing. Patricia Williams testified first. She talked about home inspections, interviews, Richard's changes at work, the therapy progress. In my professional opinion, Patricia concluded, Mr. Morrison has demonstrated genuine, sustained commitment to these children's well-being. Then it was Daniel's turn. He walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. The judge, a tired-looking woman named Henderson, looked at him with kind eyes. Daniel, I need to ask you some questions. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Why do you want Mr. Morrison to be your legal guardian? Daniel thought about lying, about giving the answer he thought they wanted. But he had learned something important. The truth was always stronger than lies. Because he stayed, Daniel said quietly but clearly, everyone else leaves. Foster parents, social workers, teachers, people who promise they care. But Mr. Morrison stayed. When I tested him, when I pushed him away, when Marcus was awful to him, when it would have been easier to give up, he stayed. He kept showing up, every single day. And you trust him? Daniel looked directly at Richard, saw the man who had been a stranger for months ago, who had opened his home, who had learned to cook, who had sat with Maya through nightmares, who had taught Marcus to drive, patiently, even after Marcus crashed into a mailbox, who had asked Daniel about his mother and then actually listened. I trust him, Daniel said, maybe more than I've ever trusted anyone. The judge took a recess that lasted 30 minutes, but felt like 30 years. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. I've reviewed all the evidence. This is highly unusual. Morrison, you have virtually no experience as a primary caregiver. Your relationship with your own daughter is strained. These children have significant trauma histories. This could easily fail. Richard's hand tightened on the table, knuckles white. However, Judge Henderson looked at Daniel, Marcus, Maya. I've also reviewed the psychological evaluations showing remarkable progress, the therapy reports, the evidence of genuine attachment. Most importantly, I've seen 3 children who, for perhaps the first time, actually feel safe, who feel wanted, who feel like they matter. She looked directly at Richard. Guardianship is granted. Conditional. We'll have mandatory check-ins every 3 months for the first year. Any evidence of neglect, instability, or harm, and this ends immediately. Do you understand, Morrison? Yes, Your Honor. Completely. Good. Because these children deserve better than another broken promise. Don't make me regret this. She hit the gavel. It was done. Legal. Official. Real. Daniel felt something break open in his chest. Not fear, not doubt. Hope. Terrifying, fragile, beautiful hope. Life gradually settled into rhythms. Real school for Daniel, Marcus, and Maya. Actual school with teachers and books and homework and friends and normal problems. Therapy every week. Piano lessons for Maya, and she was getting good. Driving lessons for Marcus, who was less good but improving. Homework struggles and dinner arguments and normal, beautiful, wonderfully ordinary family chaos. Richard still worked, but differently. He delegated. He came home for dinner every night. He didn't miss recitals or games or parent-teacher conferences. He was present. Emma started coming around more. Slowly, carefully. Building a fragile bridge to her father one awkward dinner at a time. Learning to trust that maybe he had actually changed. It wasn't perfect. Life never is. Marcus still had nightmares. Maya still panicked when food ran low, hoarding snacks. Daniel still sometimes woke up expecting to be back on the streets. Richard still occasionally fell into old work patterns when stressed. But they were all trying, together. That's what mattered. One quiet evening, 7 months after the crash, Daniel found Richard standing alone on the balcony. Can I ask you something? Daniel said softly. Always. Do you ever regret it? Taking us in? Changing your whole life? Richard looked at him with surprise. Double quotes, never. Not once. Why would you ask? We're complicated. We cost money. We disrupted your life. You could have just written a check and moved on. I could have, Richard agreed. But then I would have missed this. Missed what? This. A real family. Not the one I was born into or married into, but the one I chose. The one that chose me back. That's worth everything. Daniel was quiet, looking out at the city. Then, I never properly thanked you. For staying. For not giving up on us. You saved my life, Daniel. I'm just returning the favor. Are we even then? Richard smiled. Not even close. You saved my life that one night, but you keep saving it over and over. Every single day. By letting me be part of your life. By giving me a reason to be better. By reminding me what actually matters. Daniel felt tears threatening but didn't try to stop them. I was so scared that night. In the warehouse. When I called you. I thought I was giving up control. Giving up freedom. Were you? No, Daniel said softly, with certainty. I was giving up loneliness. I was choosing connection. There's a difference, and I didn't understand it until now. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the city. The same city that had been both cruel and kind. That had taken everything from Daniel and then, impossibly, given something back. The first anniversary of the crash arrived quietly. Richard had planned a simple dinner. Just the five of them, Richard, Daniel, Marcus, Maya, and Emma, who had slowly become part of their strange, beautiful, patchwork family. They were sitting down to eat when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Richard answered it. A woman in her 60s stood there, nervous, holding an envelope. Morrison? My name is Margaret Chen. I think I might be Daniel's aunt. His mother's sister. Daniel appeared behind Richard, and Margaret gasped. You look exactly like her. Exactly like my sister. Daniel couldn't breathe. Your mother and I had a terrible falling out before you were born. I didn't know she had died. Didn't know you existed until I saw a newspaper article last week. Her voice was thick with emotion. I know I have no right to reach out after all these years, but if you're willing, I'd very much like to meet you, to tell you about your mother, to be part of your life, if you'll let me. Daniel looked at Richard, at Marcus and Maya and Emma round the table, at the family he had built from nothing. A year ago, he would have run toward this desperately. Desperate for blood, for someone who shared his DNA. But he had learned something profound. Family wasn't blood. Family was choice. It was people who stayed when staying was hard. I'll meet you, Daniel said. I want to know about my mother. But this is my family. They are. Nothing changes that. Richard's eyes were wet. We're honored, he said quietly. That evening, they all gathered for dinner. Richard cooked, badly but with love. Marcus complained about homework. Maya played her newest song with pride. Emma told a funny story about college. Margaret joined them, bringing dessert. Daniel looked around the table at each face and felt something overwhelming. Gratitude. Not for what he had been given, though that was immense, but for what he had chosen. For running toward the fire. For making that terrifying phone call. For trusting when trust felt impossible. For believing the world contained more kindness than cruelty. As they ate together, Richard raised his glass, a toast. 2 second chances. To first chances, Marcus corrected with a grin. For some of us. 2 chances, Emma amended. However they come. They clinked glasses, the sound like bells. And Daniel realized something profound. The miracle wasn't that he had saved Richard's life that night. The miracle was that they had saved each other. That a homeless boy and a broken millionaire and 3 lost kids and an estranged daughter had somehow found each other in a city of millions. That they had chosen to become a family. That they had proven family wasn't about blood or perfection or living up to some ideal. It was about showing up, staying present, choosing love even when love was terrifying. Especially then. Daniel looked at Richard across the table. Richard looked back, and in that moment, both understood the same truth. Some rescues happen in a single dramatic instant. Others take years of patient, daily effort. Both are miracles. Both are worth every sacrifice. Both are proof that even in the darkest tunnel, even in the coldest night, Even when hope seems impossible, someone might choose to run toward the fire instead of away from it. Someone might choose to stay instead of leaving. Someone might choose to save you. And in saving you, they save themselves too. We are not saved alone. We are saved together. And sometimes the greatest miracle of all is finding the courage to let someone else reach into your darkness and pull you toward the light, and then choosing to reach back and pull them toward the light too. That's what family really means.